Hi, this is Brian Forrester, and today we're going to be exploring one of my favorite ancient places in Peru, and one that I actually haven't visited for quite a long time. But on this occasion, an American film crew came down doing a documentary about megalithic sites in Peru, and so of course, as the guide, I had to include this location so that they could film it. They asked where it is exactly we are, what we're going to see, and I said, no, you have to experience it because it's one of the most special and most enigmatic places in all of the highlands of Peru. Here we can see some andene terraces built by the Inca, but the actual ancient site itself predates the Inca probably by several thousand years. And it's typical of an Inca site whereby there is a megalithic core to it. So the Inca found this location and then built the andene terraces and a couple of small houses in the near vicinity. So this massive staircase of 300 to 400 stairs goes up to the location, and if you want to look it up on the internet, the conventional name is Ñaupa Iglesia. Ñaupa means ancient, or the ancient ones. That's in the Inca language. Oh, there's one of the cameramen. And then Iglesia is Spanish, which means church. So it means the ancient church. And I've decided to rename it Ñaupa Huaca, which again is Inca, and that means the sacred place of the ancient ones, or the sacred ancient place. Now it's quite unique in terms of its construction, as you'll soon see. We are now several hundred feet above the little stream that runs down through a side valley close to the sacred valley of Peru. And now we're actually going up to the cave itself. So already you can see an interesting ancient thing on the left-hand side. Sorry, the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, these are Inca constructions. And as you can also see, it's a natural cave. But look at this incredible false door carved into the bedrock. And this 3-level depression in a large piece of stone. And again, there is the Inca element. So here, what I call the false door, as I said, was carved into the bedrock. The type of stone is volcanic. It's not granite, but it could actually be porphyry, which is actually harder than granite, possibly 8 out of 10 in the hardness scale. So this would not have been something that the Inca could have done. Quite finely finished, and just very enigmatic. Some people think that this is an ancient energy portal. It's definitely a place where you can do meditation, as one of the film crew is doing here. And as I said, it's quite unique. Similar to what we see in Egypt, but in terms of Peru and Bolivia, as far as I can tell, at least in my experience, it's one of a kind. The acoustic properties of the false door are really quite interesting. And then this other component here was likely used by the High Inca for meditation and other purposes. But this is the actual Inca construction, and the only other place where we find these exact shapes of depressions or windows is at Tiwanaku in Bolivia and Pumapunku. So that was our short but interesting visit to this very special place. And now to show you how treacherous it is to get there, there's the actually the supply train that is coming back from Machu Picchu going to Cusco. And looking down to where the little stream is, the main road and the train tracks, and the treacherous staircase that I have to descend. This is actually the small section of stairs. It has recently been repaired by two foreign ladies who take care of this place, which is very nice. And then along this ledge, again, an Inca construction. And now the long staircase. As I said, at least 300 or 400 stairs to go down. And that's looking back up with one of the documentary cameramen coming down. And then along the edge of one of the Andeni terraces, now where we're at is Sacsayhuaman, which was a major and is a major Inca site, and it's a combination of megalithic and then later Inca. This is part of the megalithic aspect, several thousand years older than the Inca. And this is called a chincana, which is a tunnel. Now, the tunnel itself was originally natural, made out of metamorphosed limestone, and then was altered and enhanced by the Inca in order to be used during celebrations, and also it was a way of moving water from higher up into the city of Cusco. A major point is that a lot of the Inca sites were not used for one single purpose, but different purposes depending upon the time of the year. So once we come through this area, again, we're looking at megalithic there in the foreground and Inca in the background. And this is another of the megalithic aspects. It appears to be like a staircase, but the staircase is upside down, and it could be that during a massive cataclysm, the giant stone was flipped over. And as we continue through Sacsayhuaman, we're going to see more ancient megalithic aspects, such as here, and incredible weathering of the stone, which indicates its great antiquity. There again, flat surfaces of the megalithic time period. The most famous aspect of Sacsayhuaman, or Sacsayuma, is this giant wall, which is the largest megalithic wall in the Americas and quite possibly the world. Some of the stones here weigh 125 tons and were moved from a quarry at least 3 miles away. Again, the extreme weathering and lack of tool marks indicates that this is from the megalithic time period. The Inca did not build it, the Inca found it, and that's what they explained to the Spanish when they first arrived in Cusco, that this was here, and then they conducted repair work, as you can see. Every one of these stones fits perfectly together. And here is the shape of a puma's paw, which is quite intriguing. We're now walking through 2 megalithic stones, and here we have a staircase created during the Inca time period. And as we go up, once again, you see the second level, which is megalithic. There is the shape of a snake, massive doorway, 2 Inca stairs added in, and then here we have the shape of a snake created during the megalithic time period. There are also the shapes of llama and fish and other animals. Now we're looking down at an Inca period staircase. And there, the megalithic aspect. And here, a giant megalithic doorway with no staircase. After this, we explored the labyrinth located at Kenko. And what Kenko means is zigzag. So again, it's a natural limestone formation, metamorphosed and then enhanced during the Inca time period and possibly even the earlier megalithic time period. And what you're about to see is our group from June of 2019 exploring Kenko and Sacsayhuaman on this day. It was a 10-day tour, and again, we will be repeating it in June of 2020. And now, let's hear from local expert Dr. Teo Paredes.
Kenko means 2 things. Means labyrinth,
Give some space there for
or
people.
also the zigzag. The shape of the snake, the shape of lightning, the shape of the running water. That means Kenko. And the name of this place is because now we cannot go on the top. It has been forbidden. But in the top there are 2 kind of columns that in the here. Yeah, and this is this kind of monolith on the floor that by this time of the year, with the light, it produces that kind of shape and light, which is like a puma.
So the final aspect of Kenko is going into this small cavern where Irene has her hands on is a ritual table utilized by the Inca for mummification of their nobility, but it was originally a creation during the megalithic time period. The Inca were very clever at utilizing things that they found. Hi, this is Brian Forrester, and today we're exploring the ancient site of Inquiltambo, located outside of Cusco, Peru. Now, the pyramidal structures you're looking at now will be part of a future video. So it's still astonishing that there are thousands of miles of Inca roads and trails that still have the stone retaining walls that you can see there. And on this day, we were very fortunate to have Dr. Teo Paredes as our guide. He's an absolute expert of the area. What you're looking at here, you might think is Inca, but in fact is a colonial Spanish brick oven that has, of course, been abandoned. But where we have set our sights on is Inquiltambo, and unfortunately I was not able to get the proper translation. Tambo means inn or resting place, and this was a location in Inca times where people would stop and worship and do other activities on their way from Cusco to the Sacred Valley and back. This is the site of Inquiltambo, and what's intriguing about it is a combination of Inca and much, much older megalithic work, which we are going to see. And the site has been beautifully restored and maintained by the Peruvian government quite recently at the cost of more than $1 million. So it's wonderful that they have spent this much time and effort on a site that probably 10 to 15 people visit per day. So here we are crossing over a little wooden bridge, which of course would have been a wooden bridge as well during Inca times. And we're going to be looking at some very rough Inca stonework, some very fine Inca stonework, and some mysterious megalithic work, which, as I said, is clearly much, much older than the Inca. So here you get a sense of scale of Inquiltambo. Lots and lots of agricultural terracing, so it was able to accompany or accommodate quite a number of people on their journey from Cusco to the Sacred Valley and back, and it was a major center during Inca times. Of course, my personal interest, aside from loving Inca work, are the megalithic structures that we find at many of the Inca locations. And here's quite a fine example of very good Inca stone polygonal construction. You can see how tight-fitting the stones are. Unfortunately, again, centuries of damage and neglect, but some very good restoration work. And here, the megalithic aspect. I'm able to actually walk into this channel, at least 30 feet inside, and there are two interesting chambers at the end, one on the left side, one on the right side, that are very resonant in nature. So it would appear that the original function of this, whoever it was who made megalithic work like that, which we don't know, was vibrational or acoustic in nature. So as we go in reasonably close, you can see that the surfaces are extremely weathered, even these inner surfaces. So that tells us that they are very, very ancient, and so much erosion that there, excuse me, very little sign of tool marks. But upon closer examination, after we have this view here, we're going to see, in fact, that there are tool marks, or at least this is a great example of a polished surface, which I'm going to put my finger up against to show you a sense of scale. This vertical surface, narrow though it is much more highly polished and is slightly deeper than the surrounding surfaces. So this clearly is evidence of some kind of ancient machine technology being involved. There we have a view of the major megalithic aspect and Inca retaining walls. And at one time, this entire valley, stretching for miles, was terraced by the Inca. Unfortunately, once again, due to time and neglect, many of the andenes, which are the name of the terraces, have collapsed. But here is another very fine example of Inca craftsmanship. And in the background, we have the side area of the main megalithic structure. So again, strange indentations into the stone, transitioning into fine Inca work. And here again, another great example of Inca craftsmanship, transitioning into the megalithic. And here Dr. Teo Paredes is showing us the sense of scale and the accuracy of the Inca stonework. Now around the back side, again we see cut surfaces. You see those major indentations. And then here, more indentations on the back surface, the Inca on the left transitioning into the megalithic, and then back to the Inca again on the right-hand side. And finally, an overview of Inquiltambo, the remains of a once great pyramidal structure of the Chincha culture on the coast of Peru, and an artist's impression of what it may have looked like. Many cultures occupied this area: the Paracas, the Chincha, the Nazca, the Wari, and the Inca. And this is a depiction of a religious leader of the Inca. Notice he's depicted as having an elongated head. So in the little on-site museum, many ancient artifacts of the various cultures that were at this site called La Centinela, including the Inca, the Wari, the Nazca, the Paracas, and even the Spanish, of course, and even some human remains. What you may not know of the Chincha culture is that they were great seafaring people and traded as far north as Ecuador, or possibly as far north as Central America. Please enjoy the following quadcopter footage of this interesting location.
Okay, so this talk is called Megaliths and Mysteries of Ancient South America. And we're going to be looking at the origins of the gods in Peru and Bolivia and their influence over the Inca culture and how they created some of the most amazing megalithic structures on the planet. My name's Hugh Newman. I'm an author, 2008 or Cusco, but then Capac much for late and around, but it's the of the pack. What Church and Temple is a very special place. It's been built up now. It's like a Christian church and temple, almost like a cathedral of ancient Peru. And it was supposed to have been founded by the Inca, but there's evidence, as we'll see, and as we've already discussed, that it may be much earlier. So officially, in the 1400s, it was being built just a few hundred years ago. And it really marks the center of the ancient Inca world, but also the ancient Andean world, going back before the Inca. The first Inca ruler, Manco Capac, ordered the building of the original temple, but it was the 9th Inca, Pachacutec, who enlarged, improved and modernized it from about 1438 onwards. And you can see here, this is a model which is on display at the site itself in the Interior Museum. And you can see it's got a gold rim around the top of the walls. And it's thought the entire temple was covered in gold and silver. This is an artist's impression of what it may have looked like. Now this was completely engulfed in gold. They saw gold as like we see a normal kind of metal or normal ceramic, that there was so much of it available to them that they took it for granted, and they were surprised that when the Spanish came over that they were even interested in it, because it wasn't their most precious metal or anything like this. The interior contained temples, and you can still see some of these temples now, dedicated to the sun, moon, rainbow stars, thunder and lightning, and many other things. There was also a moon temple which was covered in silver. And so we see that even now, all of this gold is gone. All of the silver is gone. It was taken by the Spanish invaders back in the 15 and 1600s. This is what we see today. This is the center. This is the dead center of the Coricancha. It's a great bowl with a hole carved in it, made out of basalt or andesite. And this now marks the center, although it wasn't originally here. It was called the Palace of the Sun, or the House of the Sun. And the name we have now, the Coricancha, translates as the Golden Palace. And here we can see on the bottom, we start to see evidence of very high stone technology. This is one of the most fascinating things about Cusco, but also about the Coricancha, is that it has extremely sophisticated stone technologies here, some of the most sophisticated on the planet. So even if it was built in the 1400s, which is unlikely, it's probably much earlier, it's still very advanced for its time. I'm here with David Hatcher-Childress. We did a tour there a few years ago. But even the stone itself comes from between 30 and 50 kilometers away. It's not local stone. It was specifically chosen to build this particular site. And it's also a very interesting location. It's the center or the navel of what they believed was the origin point of the country. And so it's like a belly site, a navel site, an axis mundi or omphalos of the actual area. This is the outer wall of the Coricancha, and there are a series of what are called keks coming out from the center of the Coricancha, 41 straight lines going in all different directions, and these were marked through the landscape with huacas, or small piles of stones and offerings throughout the landscape, going for hundreds of miles in some cases. And there were supposed to be 328 huacas, or survey points, and they were thought to represent slightly, partly astronomical, but also partly spiritual and partly surveying of the landscape. And they also mark springs and water sources of the region. So even back then, even if it was the 1400s, or it could have been thousands of years earlier, which is more likely, it does suggest they had a very high understanding of many different disciplines which we take for granted today. And we have some of the walls of the palace, which is built around the Coricancha. We see these beautiful serpent carvings on. And we find these all over ancient Peru, and in fact all over the world. Here's just some of the walls and some of the serpents, and you can see all the kind of protrusions we find on some of the stones here. This is a thing we find all over Peru. We find these beautiful serpent carvings. These are all 3D relief carvings. As this is actually within the palace itself, in the museum there, and we have the 12-sided stone, and these are all puffy polygonal stone. It's very hard stone, very difficult to carve, and it's thought that the ancients may have even softened the stone. That is one theory. And even around the town, some of the walls, you find these different effigies of pumas or serpents and other such things shaped and placed in the wall in a very playful megalithic manner, which is absolutely fascinating. But if we head up to the hills of Cusco, I'm just going to give you a brief introduction to some of the major megalithic sites here before we head to Lake Titicaca. We have Sacsayhuaman, which is a remarkable site, and it has some of the most impressive stonework on the planet. This is a photo I took back in a couple of years ago, 2015 I believe, and you can just see how beautifully cut these are. And these are extremely big stones. Some of them are up to about 200 tons, and this was about twice or 3 times taller originally, until it was kind of destroyed and partly damaged by the incoming Spanish in the 1600s or a little bit earlier. But there are stories and legends that go much further back, which talk about the idea that they were actually built by giants. They were built by these gods deep in prehistory. No one knows exactly when and who these people were. But when we get to the area of Lake Titicaca and the stories of Viracocha and the creation myths, we'll get some idea. These just shows you the size of some of the stones here. It is really quite stunning when you actually look at this close up. There's even ideas that there's actually a language encoded into the walls of Sacsayhuaman. They talk about there's a gentleman called Dr. Cunningham who's done some research into these walls, and he believes there are astronomical and geometric values within each of the sides of the stones, and this creates almost like an ancient language, like a universal language beyond, you know, writings, beyond hieroglyphs, actually going back to geometry and maths, which can be understood, if they can understand it, by any culture at any time. So this is an intriguing discovery. More research is still being done on this, but if this is the case, the walls themselves might hold clues, much like the Great Pyramid does it in Egypt, as to the origins of these particular sites, and also very high knowledge and high wisdom. Here's one of the gateways at Sacsayhuaman, and you can see it's kind of trilithon style, much like Stonehenge. And on the right here we have one of the protrusions, which these are, no one really knows what these are for. It could be to tune the stones. Others believe they're to tie ropes around to move the stones, but it's highly unlikely because some of these are very low relief and you wouldn't be able to get a rope around them. Then we have these machine tooled steps up in the top part of Sacsayhuaman, which no one can explain how they did it. They've almost been polished. But if you were doing this by hand, this would take decades to do. But they seem to have a technique of softening and carving these stones to a very high degree of sophistication. This is me getting quite excited when visiting Sacsayhuaman, like I usually do. But you can see the interior, the corners here, they even shape them in a certain way. They're very puffy, almost pillow-like. All along here you can see this as well. And we have the way they sort of join the corners here is a design spec we see in different parts of the world, including Egypt. But further along the Sacred Valley, if we head through different part of Peru, we reach Machu Picchu. Now this is believed to be an Inca site discovered by Hiram Bingham in the early 1900s, but in fact, again, we have the polygonal, megalithic and cyclopean stonework with a very high degree of sophistication once again. We even have stories of people going into this area from the late 1800s, discovering skeletons and even live tribes of giants along the Amazon. This is called the Hitchin Post of the Sun at Machu Picchu. It's believed to be an astronomical clock, amongst other things, and this is one of the most important aspects because it shows not only a very sophisticated technology, but it could also hold clues as to how they recorded the movements of the sun, moon and the stars. This is the outer wall of the Temple of the Three Windows, and not many people go to this part, but this is very interesting because we see these kind of striations on some of the stones here. It's almost like the stones have been softened. We have massive megalithic blocks making up this particular site. So Machu Picchu is an impressive site which was later incorporated and probably discovered by the Inca in the 1400s or so. And then they built upon it with these smaller stones we see here and other areas. But it was really this original Viracocha oriented and inspired building was probably much, much earlier, potentially thousands of years old, and I believe contemporary with other megalithic constructions such as Stonehenge and the Giza pyramids around 3,000 or so BC. Another site in the area along the Sacred Valley is Ollantaytambo. This is supposedly built by Pachacuti, and it was his royal estate who conquered the region in the 1400s, and it was a stronghold for Manco Inca Yupanqui, and he was a leader of the Inca resistance sometime after this. But again, even when the Inca discovered it, it's believed it was already partly destroyed and not completed. It was a megalithic temple construction on a mountain, and amazingly, the stones came from several miles away up the top of another mountain and would have had to be moved across a valley, a river, swamps, and then back up the mountain. And some of these stones again are at least 100 tons. Again, we see the beautiful precision stonework with these protrusions all over the stones. We even have one of the opposing mountain has what is believed to be the face of Viracocha with a beard carved into the rock face, several hundred feet tall, with temples and constructions all around the area. We also have very obscure and unusual stones that look like massive keyboard buttons, again at Ollantaytambo. And then we have these as well, and these are all on the top part of the main megalithic temple where the Great Wall is. And you can just see some aerial shots here of the site itself to get a sense of scale. These are terraces which were used for agriculture. This is the main area where people visit with the great stones, which have got beautiful carvings on them. These are some of the massive megalithic blocks that we find all over the site here, and it stretches for a good about a kilometre, and you can see carvings within the rocks here. We can see the way that all through here, down this area, down on the left, are what are called lazy stones. This is where stones that were brought over from the quarry were somehow left there. They were carved, they were created, and here's one example here of me standing next to it. And you can see how the size of these. Now you imagine trying to move a block this big, that's probably 20 feet long, it's probably 40, maybe 50 tons. And they were carrying these somehow from the quarry on top of a mountain, across these rivers and up to Ollantaytambo itself, up another mountain. And it's believed there's stories, there's legends that talk about the transportation of these stones was done by magic, and they were levitating the stones from one mountaintop to the other mountaintop. And it's almost like they were using their telekinetic abilities. A pretty girl would walk by, they would lose their concentration, and these stones would fall on the ground. And it's like there's several of these, there's probably 10 of these between the quarry and the site. And again, some of the stonework here on the left, we have Aswan in Egypt and Ollantaytambo, and we'll look at more of these in one of the other lectures. But we can see there's virtually exactly the same scoop marks as though they softened the stone. This is Aswan quarry in Egypt. You can see almost exactly the same style of stonework and quarrying, and it's thought that they were actually using these stones, these diorite blocks, to actually carve them, which is unbelievable when you look at some of the stonework here at Machu Picchu, for instance. And you can see more evidence of these kind of striations all over the stones. You can see them here, in various parts of Machu Picchu. You can see them very well on this sort of tourist photo we took of our group way back in 2011. Some of the striations, we didn't notice this until the photo was produced, but it's almost like they just scooped the stone. They've kind of created this, and it's part of the design spec. It's part of saying, look, this is how we did it. This is the technology we were using. Here you go. This is at Ollantaytambo, and you can see it's just like it's been scooped, like an ice cream scoop, just moving across softened stone. And we even amazingly find this at Stonehenge, very similar style of scooping the stone. So whether they were just master stone carvers and they could work with extremely hard granite and sarsen stone, as here in Stonehenge, or whether they were able to manipulate the stone, whether through sound vibration, or as some traditions say that, you know, they were using some kind of plant sap which would soften and melt the stone in Peru. But it's really the path of Viracocha, which Cuzco is on, as in Ollantaytambo and Machu Picchu and other places. There's a story that the great god Viracocha was said to have constructed all the sites using a race of giants that he created from the earth and from stone to build these sites along this particular alignment, going all the way up to the coast, beginning at Tiwanaku and the area around Lake Titicaca. And Viracocha himself kind of translates as foam of the sea in some cases, and there's stories of him emerging from Lake Titicaca onto the island of the sun in the middle of Lake Titicaca, and then building his empire from there. Here's an image of Viracocha, or some people say Manco Capac, and we can see this is the island of the sun here. These are some earth energy currents which seem to stretch all the way around the world. But this is interesting because this part of the island here, where we find these constructions on the north part of the island, where Viracocha is said to have emerged from the lake. Now, if this is the case, then it does suggest a very ancient origin, because Lake Titicaca and the stories there and some of the dating they've got back there go very, very far back, thousands of years BC. And he was also known as Thunupa, or the thunder god. And there's many different strange stories. I've bought local books, I've talked to local guides and wisdom keepers in the area. And his legend is so powerful that it's believed to have influenced the Inca. He's represented sometimes as a serpent, or even a plumed serpent, like we find in Central America with Quetzalcoatl and Cuculclan. And even relationships and similarities can be found to Osiris in Egypt and other areas around the world. He's often depicted, like at Tiwanaku here, holding two staffs, and he's crying because of the lost land that he was supposed to have come from, which some people say is Atlantis. And here we have other depictions of him emerging from the lake, and sometimes it's a raft of serpents that he is supposed to have emerged from. And so there's lots and lots of very interesting stories about him, and the fact he's carved onto the landscape, into the mountains here, is very interesting. He was seen as a teacher, a healer, a wizard, a scientist, magician, and he looked like a Christian saint in some of the early paintings, much like Jesus. He was accompanied by what were called faithful soldiers and shining ones, and the various Viracochas, it was like a group of them in some cases, some stories. They went off in different directions to share the message that he was giving to different parts of the world. And one of these included building megalithic temples along the path of Viracocha, the specific alignment, and by a race of earthen or stone giants. Now, the lake was considered the center of the cosmos and the place of creation. And we see the location of it here. We have the island of the sun. We have the Peru-Bolivia border here, Peru this side, Bolivia that side. Many of the sites around here are very interesting megalithic temples all the way around here as well. And this is what it looks like if you turn it the other way up. It looks like a stone puma. And that's kind of what Titicaca translates as, stone puma. And so the fact that we're having the name is actually a representation of what it looks like is really quite interesting. But Tiwanaku itself is very, very powerful site. This is an early photo taken in the very early 1900s of the Kalasasaya temple and the monoliths, the 99 of them that surrounded that particular temple. But all around the lake we find evidence of these different symbols and relationships to Viracocha and other gods often depicted in this kind of position with his hands together in an upright position, wearing some kind of headdress or helmet or even a turban. We have serpent symbolism all around the lake. We find that everywhere, and we'll come on to some of these sites in more detail and look at the importance and sophistication of them as we go through this lecture. But the Viracochas were said to have even headed towards the coast, and in the 16th century, written by a magistrate who was named Louis de Monzon, he was the first person to announce the Nazca lines to the world. Not many people know this, and he recalled through the local oral tradition that they were linked to the people who called themselves the Viracochas, coming from the area of Lake Titicaca. And you can see some of the images of the Nazca lines here, and these go on for many miles. There's hundreds of effigies, there's straight lines marked again by these keks or these huacas. So they were placing sacred stones in piles along these particular alignments. But Viracocha, as we mentioned briefly earlier, created a race of giants. Now these are the stone giants that we find in America. There's depictions of them, there's descriptions of them. We feature them quite in detail in our book, Giants on Record. This is David Cusick's sketches of from 1828. And he talked about these Muwok Indians, etc., and they were the stone giants. But we have exactly the same story around Lake Titicaca and the creation of the megalithic sites, but he had to also destroy them. Viracocha, because these giants got out of hand, they became cannibalistic, they would attack people, they wouldn't obey his commands and continue the work he wanted to be done. He had to destroy them with a flood. Now, this is a direct replica. It's almost exactly the same as the story of the Nephilim giants that were created in the biblical tradition, going back many thousands of years. And this is really intriguing in itself because we're finding parallel myths and legends relating to giants in different ages of mankind. We find similar things in Central America with the Aztec, Mayan and Olmec origin stories as well. And throughout South America, we have found many examples of actual giant bones being discovered. And this is an early depiction of Viracocha wearing his robes. He was very similar to Quetzalcoatl in that he was long-haired, bearded, tall, sometimes fair-skinned, which is controversial, but these are the stories that they talk about. And you can see even facial hair is on this particular depiction of him here. And he was also, there was an 8th Inca who was basically called himself Viracocha. And again, the strange thing is, the very early Inca, the royal Inca, not only was said to be fair-skinned and sometimes bearded, but they spoke a completely different language to the native local people. And they looked very different. They weren't the origin, what didn't seem to be in that part of South America. And this is very intriguing. This is a bust. There was actually like a full body, which the body is still on display actually in the museum in Cusco. But indigenous people ranked below Spaniards according to the Spaniards, and so there was a lot of hoo-ha, and people believed that the Spaniards tried to make the early gods look fair-skinned so it would look like them, but actually that wasn't necessarily the case. And so there's pictorial evidence that suggests they were a kind of different type of human being in that part of the world. But Isla del Sol, this is in the middle of Lake Titicaca, a very important place, and the birthplace of Viracocha, who came from the waters. There's a depiction of him here. This is the south part of the island where there's some Inca ruins, and you're looking over to the island of the moon here. And when we do our trips there, we take people up to the north part and the southern part of the island. But on the north part of the island, there's some very interesting ruins. This is almost like a tabletop or dolmen construction with a large stone underneath it. Now this is unusual, and this has been noted that this type of rock comes from the mainland. It's not local to the island. And just next to that is what is called the Rock of the Cat, or the Rock of the Puma. on the north part of the island. And the interesting geological features of this is that on either side of this we have strips of a stone called ilmenite, which is very, very electrically conductive and magnetic. There's also magnetic red sandstone, which is much less magnetic, underground water and telluric currents. So this is a very strong energetic point on the island, and this has been noted because there's been strange balls of light have been witnessed here over many hundreds of years, potentially thousands of years. And the island, up until the Inca times, was still revered, and females will come over there and do retreats on the island going back many hundreds of years. And so it's a very sacred part of the island, and it was because it's the birthplace of Viracocha. It's also the birthplace of where it's thought Manco Capac and the Inca culture came from. So the Inca would revere it in a very similar way. Again, we see the shape of the island here and the different parts of it. And it's here where, you know, some very important megalithic sites emerged from around the lake, not just that part. You know, we have the southern part of the lake here. There's some interesting sites: the Santiago Oje, the Serpent Temple. We have Chirapa, which is before Tiwanaku. We have Conco Wankani and Tiwanaku itself, obviously, and this is all the southern part of the lake. But Chirapa is a very interesting site. Officially, it dates to 1500 BC, up to about 850 BC, but it could be much earlier. Strangely, the name of the site actually means lucky break or fluke, you know, so it's got this lucky kind of feeling, strangeness about it. And it was built within this certain kind of structure. It had a sunken temple in the middle with statues and stones around the edge. You can see that here. Visited here in late 2017. It's been slightly reconstructed, but it's a remarkable site. And you can see the strange kind of scoop marks in this particular stone here. But it had exposed walls in 1955. It was built up on a very large earthen mound. It was excavated by Michael Coe, 1955. And they know that quinoa, the grain or the pulse, was actually grown here around 1200 BC. So it's one of the earliest places in this part of the world where they were growing crops. And they worked with melted copper and bronze and different tins and metals, much like at Tiwanaku. And you can see this is when they're kind of reconstructing and excavating the site. Elongated skulls have also been found at this site, as well as very interesting statues like this one, which they called a tombstone. But there's another site, very interesting site, just on this peninsula here, called Oje, or Santiago de Oje, which means the snake temple. And you can see here, when it was first discovered, there was a big ceremony with the local Andean people. And you can see this beautiful serpent. You see these beautiful carvings here. Some of this has now been covered up. It's a huge square or rectangular temple area, and it's at least 2,000 years old, although it could be older. There's myself and JJ Ainsworth there. We visited there in late 2017. And this is the ground level, so they had to dig down to reveal most of the site here. But look at this beautiful carving here, and this stunning, it's almost like a cobra type snake. It's called the Colossus of the Great Serpent Katari, Tupac. And so we have these very strong suggestions that this was, you know, they were very much worshipping the serpent. And now we see this all over the area around Lake Titicaca, and it spread out into the Inca Empire and potentially all over the world. But the discovery here was quite remarkable. No one visits this site. It's not on any tourist trail or anything like that. We had to make special arrangements to visit here. But you can see there's something about this place, and the reason it's got this colouring, some of it was exposed, some of it was burnt by local Christians to try and destroy it, but they didn't manage it. But it's going to become a major site at some point because of its location and importance right next to the lake. And there's even ruins under the lake itself nearby, just off the coast here. There's myself and Jim Vieira at Tiwanaku. We went there together in 2016. It's a very stark landscape, Tiwanaku, although it is one of the most important sites on the planet, I would say. Again, we have the story here of the creation of the sites being built by giants. And This is the main Akapana pyramid. This is a neat reconstruction that had the Andean cross, or the Chicana pool of water on the top. We have the sunken temple here. We have the Kalasasaya temple, which had 99 massive megaliths beautifully carved around the edge. 99 is the same number of stones we find at Avebury in England. And we have the Gateway of the Sun. We have some of the Viracocha statues here. Pumapunku is over in this direction, and multiple other temples have been found around here now. They think there may even be another pyramid over in this direction. It's also flanked by two great fault lines going on either side of the valley. And even over the road, probably about a mile or so away, there's thought to be another pyramid. So this area, although it's stark, it's very difficult to grow food. It was originally next to the lake, 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, Lake Titicaca. But it's now become pretty derelict. They're still excavating here. We have the local Aymara people excavating it, and more is being discovered. But when we see these beautiful old kind of pictures, we see the stunning, just beautifully cut pieces of rock. Most of this has now been bricked up in between, so you can't really see these in detail. But this is the Gateway of the Sun. This is one piece of andesite. And andesite is a very hard type of basalt. And this is found from this is from the Cerro Capia quarry, which is the other side of the lake, in just over the Peruvian side. And this is from a mountain, so they would have had to bring it across the lake over about 50 or 60 miles just to bring it to the site. But here, this is the work done by various researchers who've realised that this could represent, we have Viracocha here potentially with the sun rays around his head holding these staffs, but also this could be a sophisticated calendar system based upon the movement of the sun and the moon. And you can see that here, the way, if you're looking across to the one side of the eastern side of the temple, we have these stones mark the movement of the sun throughout the year. And this is the work of Jim Allen. And you can see here as well, it's a remarkable site and remarkable discoveries. And here we have, basically this encodes what we're seeing here. And you can see the movement as we go through here. So each one of these represents a different movement of the sun here through the different times of the year. And this would be the equinox in the center, and we have the extremes of the solstices on either side. And so if this is the case, this is very intriguing, because this suggests, as discovered by Arthur Poznansky, that indeed this site could be up to 17,000 years old based upon the archaeoastronomy of the temple. This is just one of the large, this is the Bennett monolith, one of the great statues that was being moved. It was moved to the center of La Paz. But it got moved back to the site. This is when it was on display in La Paz. You can see the sheer magnitude of that from 1938. But it's now back at the site, thank God. And this is stunning, stunning piece of work just in itself. Then we have Pumapunku, which is one of the most important parts of the site. It's actually part of Tiwanaku. And we have an aerial shot of it here. And you can see the size of this. People didn't realise it's only been excavated recently, some of this. This is the main area here with all the megaliths, but this area here where the steps are would actually go directly onto the lake Titicaca. So this is like a port site, and it goes all the way around here, similar shape to Tiwanaku. This is what it would have looked like. This is kind of a reconstruction with some of the most sophisticated stonework we've ever seen. Another reconstruction of how it may have looked. And this was a very sophisticated, almost Greek-style temple, and yet potentially it could be many thousands of years old, although officially it's only a few hundred years AD that it was supposed to have been built. And you can see some of the stones here. These are the famous H blocks, but these are precision carved, extremely hard stone. There's drill holes in these. There's remarkable sophistication when you're looking at the quality of the stonework here. So this is just me, one of my videos. You can watch this on YouTube, but basically here I'm describing this particular channel, which is a water channel. And these are, along here we have these keystone cuts where bronze or tin and copper pieces, clamps would have been put between the stones, and it's thought they were to hold the stones together, but now it's actually thought these were in fact to channel the energy through. And through the work of John Burke and Kaj Halberg, it's now been realised, these are some of the actual clamps in the museum here, and it's now been realised that this was an energetic temple. They were flooding water from the pool on the top, from the Chinkana-shaped pool, spreading it through, and this would create electric charge. Then you have the fault lines acting, you have telluric currents, earth energies, and all these other things happening at the site at the same time. There was some kind of processing plant, some energetic temple system, which I go into more detail in some of the videos I've created on the Megalithomania YouTube channel. This just shows you another view of the site. This is the main part of the site as you come in the entrance here. And you can see some of these blocks. Now, some of these are red sandstone. These came from about 10 miles away. But again, most of the grey andesite came from Kerokapia, again, over 50 miles away on the other side of the lake. Some of these were about 200 tons, these blocks. They're very heavy, some of them sinking right into the ground, and it really does look like, you can see this yourself, it looks like a cataclysm has hit the site. So there's a big question mark about this, about who really built these sites. And the thing is, you keep finding these at the site. This was actually found right near Pumapunku. It was on display in a local restaurant. This one was as well, and you can see these are very elongated skulls, which were thought to be Inca, but actually these are before the Inca. This one actually got stolen and it's disappeared. This is another one found at Tiwanaku. Some very beautiful, very strange statues have been found at Pumapunku and Tiwanaku as well. We have the great pumas that are on display around the town. This is actually from a site just south of Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, and this is the Fuente Magna Bowl, which is something we'll look at in a moment. But it's known that the Akapana pyramid, there's a huge magnetic field right within the center of this particular pyramid here. This has been tested again by John Burke. And these spirals that are found on the stones may actually represent this, but they may also represent other things. We have the lightning here and the thunder, and it's known that Thanupa or Viracocha, different names given to him, was a thunder god who could control the lightning and thunder. Now this is a tradition we find in Britain and other parts of the world, the whole sowers of thunder tradition, often related to giants. We have some other beautiful, strange carvings found all over Tiwanaku. This would have been hidden, it's been turned over. So these could have been like the doodles or the signatures of the actual builders. And strangely, a stone sphere was found. I spotted this in 2014 at the museum in La Paz. And this is almost identical to the stone spheres we find in northern Scotland. And so it just gets stranger the more you look into these particular sites. Again, we have some very interesting faces carved on the stone. This was on display at the museum. It's now been removed, it's disappeared again. But the features of these don't look South American. This is very strange headdresses, which we find on many of the statues there. And these suggest there are ideas that these represent very Sumerian or Babylonian style that we find in the Middle East. And so there's several other sites around Lake Titicaca which are of interest. This just shows you some of them which you can visit all around this area. But there's one particularly which people are fascinated by, and that's Amarumuru, which is this one here. There's my colleague and friend Andrew Collins trying to get inside it there. And this is carved out of solid rock sandstone. No one knows who built this. There's different names given to it. Some people translate it as Gateway of the Gods. There's stories of people disappearing. They've actually gone into the stone at certain times of year. But the shape of it is very intriguing because it's almost identical to the T-pillars we find in Göbekli Tepe in southeast Turkey. Also around Lake Titicaca, very interesting discovery was made, which may link this to other parts of the world. The Fuente Magna Bowl, which is now on display in the Gold Museum in La Paz. It's supposedly made of quartzite or sandstone, according to some theories. It weighs about 50 kilos. It's about 64 centimeters wide, about 20 centimeters high. It was found in the village of Chua, about just next to the Lake Titicaca, about a few miles away from Tiwanaku. It was found in 1953, and so it kind of removes the idea that it was faked to make money from or anything like this, because this was used, strangely, for pigs to eat their food from on a farm during the 1940s and 50s. And yet, so why would you fake something like this and try and make this connection with Sumeria if it was just used to feed pigs from? Surely you wouldn't go to that much trouble. But what they've done, they found 2 different types of Sumerian script in it. And this has been analysed in the 1960s and up to more recently. And basically, there's some very interesting translations which they think is Elamite or Proto-Elamite, which is a type of Sumerian from Mesopotamia. There's Dr. Clyde A. Winters, he's been looking into it, and various other academics. And the translations come out to be quite interesting, because not only have you got a serpent going around the edge of the bowl, you've got a Mara script in there as well, which is the local Andean tradition. And it's almost like the Rosetta Stone of South America. And so people are questioning, well, what's it all about then? And this is actually the translation. And what it is, it's, looking at, I'll let you read it for yourself, but it kind of talks about the goddess Nia, talking about fertility and to offer thanks and libations to the bountiful fauna and flora in the area that made it possible for these Sumerian explorers to support themselves in Bolivia. And we believe it may have been because there were trade routes being opened up between these parts of the world. They may have been there much earlier, probably for the metal and tin that was produced here, because some of the metals found in the area around Lake Titicaca that are produced at Tiwanaku and Pumapunku have been found in other parts of the world. And on the other side of the bowl, there's more of these, talking about libations and very like incantations, almost like prayers or, different kind of stories created to make thanks to the gods and goddesses of the area. We have other carvings around the side of the bowl here. Faces carved on them, which are very much like the faces we find at Tiwanaku. And there's connections that have been made between Greek and Egyptian deities with Nia and Neith and other such things, suggesting there may have been a global diffusionism going back around this era, which is probably around 2000, maybe 3000 BC. The interesting thing is the type of script that was found on the bowl does date back to around 2500 BC. And this, to me, that's quite interesting, because that's the date I feel these sites were probably built around. They found evidence of Neolithic and Bronze Age activity at the sites, although most of it they believe is newer than that, it's much more recent. But it's known that the Sumerians used seaworthy ships that could sail across the ocean. And there's even Jim Allen, who's done some brilliant books about this area of Bolivia and South America, believes that indeed this was the case, that there was connections between these great cultures. This is the Pocoitia monolith. This was found 10 or 12 miles south of Tiwanaku, and some of the larger statues we find outside the church at Tiwanaku town are from this site. And again, we have this very strange script carved on the back of this. He's wearing kind of cool pants, headdresses, showing his ribs for some reason. It could be like a suggestion they were sort of having difficulties growing the food or so forth. But again, this is on display in the Gold Museum in La Paz, Bolivia. These are some of the other statues that were found at Pocoitia. These are on display, well, not on display, they're actually in a private room at Tiwanaku. And you can see this kneeling statue. This is called the Quizo position, which is found all over the world, mostly with tiki statues in the South Pacific. But here you can see like kind of plaits, sort of Sumerian type headdresses, even goggle eyes, which we're going to talk about in another lecture. This is the one from Tiwanaku here. These are from the South Pacific. On the left here, this is actually from Easter Island. Again, a very similar style. So we're seeing connections here all over the world in some very, very interesting places. There are other sites in this area. One of the most notable is Pucara. These are some of the carvings from Pucara. This is just to the northern part of the lake, around Lake Titicaca. And you can see here, these look almost identical with these goggle eyes, these headdresses, different features, kneeling position again, strange serpents, feathered serpents. Again, you can see the size of this here. This is a site not many people know about, but to me, this is one of the most important sites. It's even suggested it was built before Tiwanaku, and the Pucara people may have influenced the Tiwanaku culture. Again, this is actually on display in Lima, in the museum, in La Paz on the Peruvian side. You can see these crisscross and lizards and protrusions here, like we find in the later Inca culture. Remarkably similar to Göbekli Tepe as well. You can't deny the similarities are quite remarkable, and I think there may be connections that we're going to discover in the near future. This is actually from Pucara, again almost identical to Göbekli Tepe. We find other similarities at places like Silustani and Kutimbo. And again, these are from Göbekli Tepe here, the 3D relief carvings. Again, this is from Göbekli Tepe. Just shows you some of the sophistication here and here as well. And then you would think this was from Göbekli Tepe as well, and so on, but they're not. This is actually from Pucara on the north part of Lake Titicaca. But when I was there in late 2017, I made some discoveries. Surprisingly, I made a video about this and wrote an article for Ancient Origins, which you can read. While I was there, I've been very interested in these statues of Viracocha, these goggle eyes, also these features, these belts. This is actually made of diorite, which is extremely hard black stone. And I've been very interested in these statues. These are some of the classic statues at Tiwanaku, Pumapunku. This is actually supposedly in the Berlin Museum. We're going to go and investigate this soon, of a bird god, which potentially could be a representation of Thoth from ancient Egypt. This is the Bennett monolith. This is some of the other ones, the more tiki type statues in the sunken plaza. But the Cantatalita temple, which is over to one edge of Tiwanaku, we have an old photo of it here. But just past that, on the very eastern edge, I found this lost Viracocha statue. And this is the stump. It would have been standing upright on top of this. And I couldn't believe it. So I actually walked around there, went over the fence, found it completely by accident. And this had obviously been cleared, all the mud and grass had been cut away and things like this. And so probably on the other side of this, there are carvings. Because it's been placed in the ground, it's probably preserved the carvings. And it's probably been there lying there for thousands of years. If you turn that over, I guarantee there's going to be carvings. So this is one of the monoliths, one of the statues that hasn't been recorded ever by any researcher or anyone really, archaeologist, over the last 100 years. Also, when I was there, I managed to sneak into some of the hidden rooms at Tiwanaku, at the museum on site there, and discovered about 40 or 50 statues and carvings that I've never seen before, and these have never been published. So this is all in the article on ancient-origins.net and also on the video on the YouTube channel. One of the most intriguing pieces was this. This really blew my mind because it's got these beautiful hexagonal shapes carved on it, and they're like 3D tubes coming out across the stone. So again, this shows very high levels of sophistication. What these represent is unclear, but there's a few other pieces like this at Pumapunku. So this was probably found at Pumapunku and created there originally. We have other obscure shapes and carvings that were found within this hidden room. But it really does suggest that there's a lot more to be discovered. They're still excavating Pumapunku, they're still excavating Tiwanaku. They're making many more discoveries in the area, and it really is ripe for investigation. And I really believe that there's a deep prehistory here in South America, and when more discoveries are being made under the Lake Titicaca, when they dig deeper around the cataclysm hit Pumapunku and Tiwanaku, I'm sure more connections with other parts of the world will be found. And so thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this aerial view and this overview of ancient Peru and Bolivia.
Stanford University.
This program is brought to you by the Stanford Humanities Center.
For more information, please visit us at shc.stanford.edu.
Good evening. My name is Grant Parker. On behalf of Stanford's Department of Classics, I'd like to welcome you to the 12th Lawrence Eitner Lecture on Classical Art and Culture, a lecture series aimed at presenting classical antiquity to a wider public. It's wonderful to see such a good turnout this evening. The series has been endowed by Peter and Lindsay Joost, our cherished friends and benefactors over many years, friends and benefactors of Stanford Classics. In honor.
So what Rem had found in the inscriptions, the Metonic cycle, Price found embodied in the gearing. It was a very important discovery. And Price went much further than this. He described how he thought this gear was embodied into the gear wheels of the device. On the right there, you can see the main surviving fragment with its characteristic large wheel, four-spoked wheel, sometimes called the main drive wheel. It goes round one turn a year. On the left, there's a computer reconstruction, and you can see a little crown input gear, which is where the device was turned from, probably via a knob or a crank or something like that. And if you look on the back of that gear there, there's another smaller gear, B2, 64 teeth, also goes around once a year. Price then said there's another gear that meshes with it, C1 with 38 teeth. I should say this is not an epicyclic gear. I've suppressed the main plate here so you can see the gears, but this sits in a on a fixed axis in a bearing in the main plate. And we can easily calculate how fast this gear turns by the simple laws of meshing gears. We just divide the tooth counts, and it simplifies down to 32 over 19, and 19 is clearly for the Metonic cycle. Price then said there's a couple more gears, 48 teeth, 24 teeth, simply doubles the ratio. The minus sign, incidentally, is because each time you mesh two gears, they turn in opposite directions. So this is the basic way the mechanism works. It builds up increasingly compound gear trains to calculate increasingly sophisticated ratios. Then comes Price's 127 tooth gear, meshes with another little gear, E2, with 32 teeth, and calculates, you do the simple arithmetic, calculates 254 over 19, which is the sidereal version of the Metonic cycle. It essentially calculates the average position of the moon in the zodiac. Now let me just look at the output gear for this. It's got a rather strange little pentagonal hub with a hole through it. Price thought that this gear then, the output of this gear then went straight up to the front dials, to the zodiac dial that Rem had proposed to show the average position of the moon in the zodiac. But in fact, the gear train takes a completely extraordinary journey, which I'm going to describe. This wasn't a fantasy on Price's part. Here we have in modern X-rays all the gears involved with this. Unusually for the Antikythera mechanism, many of them are nearly complete. We can count the tooth counts. They all check out. This is a completely established part of the Antikythera mechanism. Price also looked at the gears at the back of the mechanism. And you'll notice there are two large gears, E3, E4. And on them sit two epicyclic gears, K1, K2. Well, why do we use epicyclic gears in gearing? One purpose for them is that if you've just got fixed axis gear trains, as we've seen with Price's gear train, then we can simply multiply and divide the tooth counts. We can't add or subtract ratios. We simply multiply and divide them. If you want to add or subtract ratios, you've got to use epicyclic gears. It's not obvious. It's difficult concept. What Price said was that this was all part of a differential system, differential difference. It calculated a difference. He said it calculated...
Yo, Baron with the sub. Yo, thanks, man. You kidding me, homie?
Around the Earth, the sidereal cycle, And from that it subtracted the orbit of the sun around the Earth. Remember, we're in geocentric.
Wow, this guy's saying that
here.
that gear, that ancient Egypt or Greek gear, works as like a differential, like a car differential. It's like with ratios and shit, like gears and ratios and shit. That's fucking complex. Okay, I gotta go though. Thanks, Baron, for the sub. You're the man, dude.
Research by a huge amount.
Thank you, Dick, for being here. Thanks for being there yesterday. That was awesome. That was so much fun. I had such a great day yesterday. How we going, yo? Thanks, man. Yo, thanks for the sub, man. I'm sorry I gotta go right when you sub, though, dude. Fuck, man. 14 months? I appreciate that a lot, man. You're the man. Okay. Don't know if anybody's online. I'm gonna see if anybody's online to raid, but I don't think anybody's online. Callie's online. Kaido's is online.
222 teeth for this gear, and Price wrote that you might think that this had something to do with the 223 lunar months of the Saros cycle, but in this context it can have
Should we raid Kaido's?
And the reason for that was that this large gear pair E384 went round much too fast.
Let's do it. It's playing Doom.
Astronomical meaning, so he discarded the idea.
It looked fun. Yeah, yesterday, yeah, but it was a lot of fun. It was great, man. It was nice just being outside again and everywhere I wanted to go. All my favorite places.
Two schematic
Alright.
of it. You can see in the middle there the little Metonic gear.
He's playing Doom.
And what it is complicated, it's difficult to understand.
Alright, see you later. Thanks, Baron. Thanks, Dick. You guys rule. Appreciate it. Really appreciate that, Baron. And Dick, you guys rule.
Everything else is wrong, completely wrong. His sun wheel is wrong, his differential gear was wrong, his 4-year dial was wrong. And this is really where I came in terms of research. I wrote a paper called Challenging the Classic Research, which criticised this model on the basis that it was far too complicated for its simple outputs. It violated an essential principle